I'm proud to share that this episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies. If you're like me and worried about your children's activities online or focus in the classroom and want to keep them safe, please consider the Bark phone. It was specifically designed for kids, unlike iPhones, and can grow with them as more access is needed over time. Okay, do you
Okay.
want to start?
I guess. Okay, I guess.
Okay,
Okay.
welcome to Tanya. Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today, we're going to talk about a hot topic that has
Mm,
been all over the news and is being talked about by legislators and authors, researchers, and everybody. And that is phones at school, the issue of phones at school. And there's momentum growing around banning cell phones in schools. More and more schools are announcing that they're going to be banning phones. The latest was Virginia. So Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin issued an executive order to limit or ban cell phone use. They have roughly at 1.2 million public school students. He described this as a response to mental health issues and academic underachievement. Los Angeles School Board near me will ban students from using cell phones during the school day starting next year. There's confusion over what a ban really means, how it will be
mm.
enforced, if ban is even the right word that's being used here. So we'll get into that, but I wanted to back up and talk about just the pros and cons, remind parents the pros and cons of kids having phones at school. So why don't we hit cons first? So when kids have phones at school, what happens? What comes to mind for you? And then I can fill in some blanks based on my conversations with teachers.
When kids have phones at schools, it's like the epitome of stupidity. Because now that we're all here, we're all collectively saying, how did we get here? Well,
Yeah.
we did this. We allowed this to happen. And
Hmm.
it makes no sense. I know what it is. It's like when you see pictures of pregnant women smoking and drinking,
Hmm.
you're like,
Yeah.
wait, what? And that's where we are with kids
Yeah.
and phones in schools. So it's not okay. It's not
Hmm.
good. It's not conducive. There's a laundry list of reasons why it's not good for them to have these supercomputers in an environment where they are supposed to learn, pay
Hmm.
attention, not be distracted, capturing media that could embarrass
Hmm.
or bully somebody. They need to be learning how to communicate interpersonally with eye contact and mannerisms and nuances. Even when it comes time to learn, the
Hmm.
ability and opportunity to physically write and flip pages
Hmm.
solidifies the material in your brain in a way that scrolling and clicking does not. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a laundry list of like this access in schools is not beneficial for kids.
Hmm. And how do we expect them to stay focused when we give them a device that's addictive, has social media apps on it or whatever apps on it that are all built to be addictive to them, and send them notifications that, maybe adults, I turned off most of my notifications. I don't know if kids do that. Do you find that kids have their notifications turned on?
Not unless they're incredibly insightful.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
they don't think about it, right? And in
Yeah.
fact, they want to know
Yeah.
when their game has renewed or their friend had texted them or they're keeping a
Hmm.
snap streak or what. Like
Yep.
kids don't turn off notifications unless they're really, really thoughtful.
Yeah. So there's a huge lack of focus. And you mentioned cyberbullying. So kids are taking images and videos of each other or of teachers and posting it during class. And then the other kid that's being bullied is seeing it and is all distressed. So there's tons of issues around cyberbullying. There was actually a big thing in the news you probably saw last week where students created fake TikTok profiles of their
Yes.
teachers and posted like homophobic, racist, horrible things on behalf of their teachers, acting as their teachers. Really bad bullying against teachers using the phones. So test scores have dropped globally. I want to note they also, having the phones at school, increase the use of illicit activities. So kids are coordinating to meet up in the bathroom or to buy or sell vapes or other drugs at school. And then also somehow they all happen to be in the bathroom at the same time vaping. How did they coordinate that? So the phones. Kids don't socialize anymore. So a lot of teachers I've spoken to just say it's so eerie how the lunchroom is silent, or they'll see a student. This was the best story. There's a student on her phone, and she was, instead of having to look up, she was walking with her shoulder against the wall, so she knew she was going straight and not running into anything. I know.
I have no words.
I know. It's ridiculous.
And think about, when we were in school, if we wanted to message a friend, right,
Mhm.
during instruction time or
Yeah.
study time, we had to very discreetly write a paper note, like
Mhm.
fold it up, somehow try to figure out how to get it to them, right?
Mhm.
And that was like a big no no. That
Mhm.
was the illicit activity. But
Yeah.
now kids can just easily message friends. They're posting on social media. They're
Mhm.
watching Netflix.
I
Like,
know.
I'll never forget when my son was telling me about watching something while he was at school. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's not okay. That is
Yeah.
not okay.
Watching things that are unnecessary or not helpful to learning, obviously, but also seeing inappropriate content on their own phone, but also showing their friends. So you may not send your kid with a phone to school, but they may see something completely inappropriate on their friend's phone at school. I think parents have the best intentions. I just want to be able to chat with them here and there with on their phones. I want them to be able to get a hold of me if they have an issue, but we're forgetting about all these other issues that it causes them having this in their pocket when they have a iPhone or a smartphone in their pocket at school. And social media is probably a big driver of a lot of these issues. And schools can't compete with the addictiveness of social media access through the phones. And that's why hundreds of school districts are actually suing the social media companies for causing the issues at school, and schools have to spend a lot more money and get more funding to support the mental health issues and the bullying and all the things that happen in schools because of social media. I think that covers most of the, the cons.
Yeah.
What would you say there's any benefits to kids having phones on them at school?
There's a big asterisk there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it can give a child and their parents or caregivers peace of mind for the child to have connected tech
Mm-hmm.
in their bag or on their person in case of emergency, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they need to dial 911. But that's really only the only use case I can think of. And we'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about this in a minute, I believe. But
Yeah.
even in the case of an emergency, the phone
Mm-hmm.
can actually be a detractor or a
Yeah.
distractor away from safety.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I really, really support the away for the day policy. When we're talking about a phone ban, it doesn't mean just we don't want to see them out, right? It's the phones are away. They're in yonder pouches, they're in the
Mm-hmm.
bags. They do not come out. Because again, the only reason I can think of is in case of emergency. And that's
Mm-hmm.
in case of emergency that doesn't require the child to be focused on instruction from an adult or law enforcement telling them how to be safe.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I can understand if there's an emergency, you want to make sure your child is okay. You want to know they're okay. But I've talked about this topic with multiple law enforcement officers and school administrators, and the kids having a phone on them makes them more unsafe during an emergency because they're distracted from doing what they need to be doing. They have a device on them that is lighting up and making noises, bringing more attention to them. And there's a few other issues around that. So we have to balance that out. Do we want to know they're okay but also make them unsafe? Like not me. I think there's also parents that have shared sort of a distrust of the schools that they're going to support their child in certain situations, not around emergencies, but say the child is getting bullied and their teacher's not doing anything about it. And my kid needs to be able to let me know that that's happening. I don't know what to say about that. Do you have any opinion on that?
I do. As the parent of a child who has been bullied, one of the reasons I wanted my son to have a smartphone was so that he could message me and let me know, like, everything okay on the bus ride?
Mm-hmm.
Things going okay.
Mm-hmm.
But in hindsight, we could have talked about it when he got home.
Right.
And most teachers, most administrators, most school counselors really do have your child's best interest at heart. If the bullying is so acute that you need to be communicating with your child in real time on
Mm-hmm.
the down low about it, your child probably doesn't need to be in that environment.
Right. It's a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Most kids get bullied to some level at school. And I think being in those uncomfortable situations are really important life lessons. And they
Yes.
will come home and talk to you about it. But having access to you all day long through those uncomfortable situations doesn't allow them to build the skills that they need to deal with uncomfortable situations as they grow.
That.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. And I think there's just discomfort around not being in communication with our kids nowadays. We're so used to it that parents are generally uncomfortable if they can't get a hold of their child one on one for 8 hours a day. there's going to have to be a shift to parents being more comfortable or handling that discomfort and trusting the schools that to get a hold of them. And that might mean going to PTA meetings and going to district meetings and being and making sure that they have, ask the questions around what happens if my child does get bullied? What's the plan? Like, when do I get contacted? If you're really going to be that uncomfortable not being able to get a hold of them, go to the school and learn the policies.
Yeah, and from the school standpoint, the more that they can over communicate, like
Yeah, right.
we realize that we are having to walk back a little bit some of the comforts that we have become acclimated
Mhm.
to prioritize our children's physical and mental health. And
Mhm.
we know it's going to be hard for all of us to adjust, but you have our word that if you need to relay a message to your child, you call this number, we'll walk
Mhm.
the note down the hall, right? Or
Yeah.
like we'll save it. Like, we're going to have to get creative with some
Mhm.
nuances, but I can't think of a single argument for why we should continue to allow what we've been allowing for the past 10 years.
Right. It's not going well. And
No.
so although 80% of schools technically already have phone bans, but let's talk about why that hasn't worked. And do you have insight into why that hasn't worked yet?
Yeah, because it's not fair or reasonable to expect a teacher to be a phone police
Right.
in addition to trying to teach your child.
Mhm.
And not only that, but given that there's pushback, um,
Mhm.
not all parents are okay with it. Parents get mad when their kid's phone gets taken away. I mean, there's so many
Mhm.
variables.
Yeah.
Just you're making it very hard. So yes, a school can have a phone ban, but if it's not enforced and if the
Mhm.
people that are required to enforce it aren't adequately equipped to do so, it's not going to work.
Right.
You cannot give a child a supercomputer and say, keep this in your pocket, don't pull it out, don't look at it.
Mhm.
I can't even do that. You can't, like, I'm in church, right? And I'm thinking, like, don't look at your phone, don't look at your phone. I look at my
Mhm.
phone. I'm an adult.
Right.
So, like, we can't expect that of kids.
No, and I've talked to dozens of teachers about this. The kid, if it's anywhere on them or even in their backpack near their desk, they're going to grab it at any point during the class. They're going to sneak it. And the teachers oftentimes just don't have time to be monitoring every single kid's activity under their desk. Like, so they're distracted. It's an issue for the teachers. It distracts everybody when they have to try to enforce it, and then the teachers are actually liable for the device if something happens to it, if the teacher touches it. So the teachers are uncomfortable handling the devices. And so it's just a bad system and it doesn't work. What's a solution that you've seen work well in schools?
When schools lean into the away for the day mentality of like,
Hmm.
these don't come out. You
Yeah.
don't you don't get to have them out in between class. You don't get to have them out at lunchtime. It's
Hmm.
before school, after school. But during
Hmm.
school, it's gone. That's impactful. If the school community is using something like a Yonder Pouch, I love that company. I love what they're doing, and I
Hmm.
love that they are growing and the demand for the pouches is growing
Hmm.
um, because it does give students like they feel safe when they can hold on to them, but they just can't access them. And I get it. It's like this psychological thing, right?
Hmm.
That we're trying to work backwards from. Also, it's the type of phone. If you go with an iPhone, you're going to have some issues when you give that to a kid. But for example, like, shameless plug, if you're going with a Bark phone,
Hmm.
you as the parent can help set your child up for success by putting it into school mode and just locking it down and
Hmm.
saying this phone isn't going to really do much while you're at school anyway, reducing their desire to pull it out in the first place.
Hmm. Okay, so parents can get their kid a Bark phone. They can lock it down during school hours so that the kid can't use the phone at all.
Yes.
That would be
Yes.
a really helpful way for parents to assist with this bigger issue. If a parent uses the Bark app on their child's like iPhone or Android, can the phone be locked down in a good way through the
Not
school day?
as much as if they're
Right,
using the Bark phone.
right.
The Bark app does absolutely give you the ability to block and limit certain apps, set time limits, that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
it's possible. But if you just want like the easy button,
Hmm. Yeah.
just go to the Bark phone.
Bark is available for free, right, to schools for schools to use. Can you explain that?
Yes. And so the majority of schools are issuing school issued tech.
Mhm.
to children to utilize. And some even have bring your own device policy, which is a whole nother can of worms we might talk about at some point.
Yeah.
But parents can only do so much on the personal tech that their children are
Mhm.
using. And parents are really at a disadvantage if the school is issuing tech, and parents have to trust that the school
Mhm.
is monitoring, is implementing the right filters, uh, etc. We allow any school in the nation to use our technology for free, Bark for Schools for the school issue tech, and
Right. Okay.
gives it's just another layer of protection, because
Okay.
we know that kids are using, let's say, Google Docs to write suicide notes or express threats against other students or
Mhm.
create burn books to bully and tease and share nudes.
Mhm.
We know that predators are using school issue devices and accounts to try to connect with kids.
Mhm.
There's so many things that happen on school issue devices and accounts. And so about 60% of schools in the nation are using something to help
Mhm.
make their school issue tech safer, but 40% aren't. And that is a huge gap. And so if your child goes to a school and you don't know what they use, ask. And if they are not using anything, let them know that there's this bark for free that they can
Mhm.
use.
That's incredible because my school's not using anything. We've talked about this before, I believe. There's no way to get alerts if something harmful happens on their school issued device. Okay, so that's good to set the school issued devices aside. But jumping in here to tell you guys a little more about the Bark phone and Bark technologies. If you don't want your kids signing up for social media or being distracted at school, an iPhone is not going to do the job. The Bark phone starter plan comes with talk and text only. If and when you're ready to start integrating some social media access or other apps, there are advanced plans available that offer those things, but not without your approval. Plus, it has advanced content monitoring, which will send you alerts of potential dangers. But when it comes to a basic phone that won't addict and distract your child from school or healthy hour activities, the Bark phone is where it is at. If your child already has an iPhone and you don't want to switch it up, please layer on Bark parental controls as a baseline. You can set screen time rules, block certain websites and apps, get alerts, and tons more helpful options for parents. Please click the links in the episode notes for more information on the Bark phone and the Bark app. Well, back to the kids' own phones in schools. I really like the Yonder solution. I think that's like the ideal way to not have them be able to access their device during school hours. And so it's a magnetic pouch. You put it in, the teachers or the administration locks it up at the beginning of the day, and the kid can't access it. I believe it's also important to have it either off or on airplane mode, because so that kids can't continually get notifications and messages on their Apple Watch or even their headphones. I assume they could probably try to get away with something on their headphones.
Just allowing kids to have headphones or AirPods in, like, no, absolutely not.
I mean, I've talked
No.
to some teachers who allow it because they think that they like it lets them concentrate more, and they're just trying to like fight. Like, this is one less battle to have to fight, is just let them have a little music on, and they'll connect it to their school issued device and listen to music through that, I believe. And then also like while they're doing their work. Now, I've talked to doctors who study multitasking, and it's a myth, and that's actually causes them to be more distracted, even if it's just music. So, especially with lyrics, yeah, that's a no if we can avoid letting them have headphones in and listening to music. And then they're getting, if they're listening to music on their phone, they're getting dings in their ear when they have notifications. It's just total distraction. It's just complicated because they also have watches now that connect to the phones. And so, even when the phone is not on them, they will still get the messages. So, again, why it's important to have the phones, if you do use Yonder pouches in airplane mode or off. I interviewed a principal in West Texas, and she was all for her high school, all for the Yonder pouch solution. She got the funding, everything's great. And then she got shut down by like just a couple of loud, opinionated parents on the PTA, and they voted it down. So, going to be interviewing her again soon to see
Mm.
how the less restrictive phone ban situation is working once her school, a couple weeks into her school year, and we'll see how that goes. But there's going to be options for schools. I mean, when a state says you have to ban phones or get phones out of the kids' hands, do you see any other good option for this on the school side, besides locking them up in pouches?
I think the schools have to be more of a thought leader in terms of expressing the why behind it.
Yeah.
Those loud parents that voted it down, if
Hmm.
they were truly faced with the data of how many children in that school
Hmm.
were experiencing XYZ issue,
Yeah.
There's no way that they could, in good conscience,
Mhm.
say, yeah, we're going to ignore all that. So letting the schools be the thought leaders in terms of this is so bad for kids that we have to
Mhm.
do this. We have to do this to do right by kids, and
Yeah.
just not on campus at all, but also having those, like bring back landlines, right?
Mhm.
Maybe have one in the hall. Maybe don't limit it to the front office. Like make sure children have a safe way to communicate
Yeah.
in case of emergency that
Right.
isn't a detractor or a distractor.
Yeah, and I think they still have landline phones in all classrooms, from what I understand. I think there's still a way to get a hold of every teacher in every classroom. I hope. That's what I've heard.
Great. Or like
Yeah.
walkie talkies, or
Right.
there's
Yeah.
we have a lot of tech options.
I know, I know. And so, if parents are interested in learning more, I think that The Anxious Generation, which is a great book by John Haidt, he vouches for phone free schools. So, that's one of his new norms that he's suggesting. And parents can learn more about the research of how phones in schools are affecting kids through his book. I highly recommend. But I also encourage parents to look into Bark Technologies, bark.us, and consider the Bark phone, because you can help this issue by getting together with other parents, getting this safer device, locking it down during school hours, and that will help to quell some of these issues that kids are having at school. But we need to also speak up to our schools and ask them what they're doing, especially if your district or state is not one that is calling for phone bans. Like, be the voice that brings it up in your school. Because it's important that our kids have disconnected time at school as much as possible to learn and socialize and gain all those skills that they're supposed to be getting and have always gotten at school. Do
100%. Let kids be kids.
Yeah.
Let them have a childhood. Let them have a middle schoolhood and a high
Yeah.
schoolhood
Yeah.
free of all of that, right? Like they're going to have
Mhm.
enough of it when they're not at school.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
allow that at home and on the weekends and when they're socializing, at
Mhm.
least let school be a safe place.
Yeah. Any other parting thoughts?
I know because I feel it myself. My son's in high school, and his high
Mhm.
school is not going to be phone free that
Mhm.
I know of. In the next few weeks, and I'm frustrated about that. And if I'm frustrated, having the resources that I have, I'm sure there are so
Mhm.
many parents out there that are like they can't even fathom how this could come to be, but it
Mhm.
it actually can. It can happen. So I would say perhaps maybe in the show notes or in the comments or wherever you're
Mhm.
listening to this, just know that you're not alone. And Nikki and I and Bark, like we want to rally to help any parent that wants to make this a reality in their child's
Mhm.
school a reality.
And I love how you said, let's let kids be kids again, and let's let them have a real school experience and not one that's filled with distractions and addictive apps. And that requires real phone free schools, real phone bans. So let's
Yes.
use the right terminology and let's be brave enough to stick to what we say and what we know is best for the kids. So, Titania, thank you for having this conversation again. I love having you on, and we'll be back soon with another topic, trending topic.
It's
So,
for the
thank
kids,
you.
right?
Yeah, it's all for the kids. We're here for the
Thanks,
kids.
Nikki.
Thanks, Tanya.